Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We are the voice of Richland College. Views expressed on this show are our own, unless otherwise stated, and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, or the DCCCD. It's the crossover! We got the crossover episode going. So we have some guests in here today. Today being, what is it, 28th?
Yes.
November 28th, 2018. Gosh, the time flies. Or does it? I don't know. The Shapeshifters were here a month ago. It feels like forever ago.
It does.
It was only 4 weeks ago. So yeah, guys, welcome. You're both new to the program, but I know that you're familiar with it to some degree, and you're brand new to KDOX Studios. Welcome.
I am.
So you know what? Let's make introductions first. We might as well. So we'll start with you on the far end. You just introduce yourself and any sort of extracurricular, co-curricular affiliations you might have on campus you want to plug, any events like that. Go for it.
Okay. My name is Eva Gatesy. I'm a freshman here at Richland.
Welcome.
And I am studying to be a fine arts major.
Oh, no kidding. So you must, like philosophy on some level.
I do.
In the same division, in the same school.
Sure, yes.
Awesome. Right on. And who do you got there to your right?
I'm Hannah Watson. I am the person that does challenging the narrative because I can't think of words. It's cool.
She's she's the hostess,
Yes.
host of Challenging the Narrative, co-host I suppose with a couple other characters, but you're the driving force, I think.
I am.
You're the mastermind
I
behind
get
it.
to turn off mics if people say things I don't like.
That's right. And not today though. It's
We'll see about that.
Yeah, hey, I know where you learned it. Can we cut mic 3? All right, guys. I'm Professor Manzi. I'm the faculty advisor of the Philosophy Club, and I do got to say this. I have a hard out at maybe like 1:55ish. Shameless plug from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. I'm leading a phenomenology workshop in the Learning Center. I believe it's reached its enrollment cap, but it's going to be promising. We're talking about the phenomenology of touch, and I'm exploring via this postmodern approach of understanding experience the connection between feeling and feelings. It's going to be an interactive. It's going to be fun, but I got to be there too because I always schedule them, at least this semester, on Wednesdays right after the radio show, and I'm always late. So this time I got to be
But you're always
there.
late regardless, so.
Can we cut mic 3? No, you're not wrong. And so, today's topic is an interesting one, but before we get into the topic, let me just say I'm so proud of the Philosophy Club student officers and student members who participated at or in the Philosophy Club fundraiser on Monday. So Monday morning, the Philosophy Club, we were here at 6:30 in the morning. Very different place, 6:30, after an extended break from Thanksgiving weekend holiday. And we really we raised about $100 selling coffee and tea and donuts and dollar kolaches and orange juice. So kudos to them. And then we had the meeting yesterday, and I was like, you know what, you guys, you earned it. If you got to put school first. Stay the hell out of my studio. Just joking. I gave them a break because they worked so hard on that fundraiser, and it came together nicely. And it also gave us this opportunity here, rather spontaneously, to challenge the narrative.
Haha, we'll see about that.
But without any... Well, actually, let me make one other plug, because I'm going to have an opportunity. The final installment in the Philosophy and Film series is happening a week from today. So 1 week from today, so that's next Wednesday, we're showing Hail Mary by Jean-Luc Godard. Jean-Luc Godard. It's a very controversial film. There'll be free popcorn and soda. And heck, maybe I spring for pizza because of the fundraiser. I mean for myself, but there'll be popcorn for you guys. And so I wanted to throw that out there. But anyways, so today's topic is an interesting one. Now, neither one of you were at the Philosophy Club meeting.
So you will have to do the requack.
Well, yeah, the requack. Geez, I'm not. I was going to say, what's a duck term for great? I'm not.
Oh, man.
Flying? Okay, whatever. Jack, can we start from the beginning?
Just cut that out.
Yeah. We do no editing on this program.
Yes.
Great.
But the topic was, in the form of a question: does tradition hinder progress or hinder advancement? So really, what is the relationship between tradition and, I guess, progression, progress? Is tradition something that could be, I suppose, advanced in a way that is uncritical? Or is tradition possibly something that sort of keeps you in chains, so to speak, where you're sort of beholden to these traditional values and ways of interpreting the world and understanding things, and it keeps you from advancing because you feel the need to remain, I guess, reverential or just loyal to the tradition. So that was the question. Here's my half-capped requack. A lot of people thought that progress was a very tricky term, and it's difficult to measure progress because the way you'd measure progress would seem to be with traditional standards. But it seems like in order to progress, the tradition itself needs to be re-evaluated or revitalized even, or in some way perhaps just deviated. And so, yeah, we went back and forth from there. So let me ask y'all, do you have any feelings on tradition? Do you feel like tradition is, appropriately considered to be a good thing, or do you think that maybe tradition can be, in fact, a negative thing? What do y'all think?
I think that tradition can hinder progress in some ways, but in other ways it can also kind of make it go forward because you take what you know and you add to it. So almost like in my psychology class, we're talking about how if you want to learn something new, you attach that to something you already know.
Okay, interesting.
So I don't know. I just think maybe that would kind of be a good crossover between the two, because tradition, you can add on more progressive values to it and make it even more, special than it was before.
Yeah, okay. I think so. And in a certain sense, maybe even enhance it.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I think it's really coincidental that you're here for today's topic in particular because, again, tradition is typically narrative.
Yeah.
So the tradition is the his story, the narrative of how certain values came about, and that spawns certain customs and certain codes of conduct, ways of behaving. Something we didn't quite get into last time, but I'd love to explore here is what happens when you seem to have competing or traditions, or what's more, in the name of the tradition and advancing things, you discover something that directly contradicts traditional values or traditional ways of doing things.
I think it causes you to have to reevaluate what you think you know.
Okay.
And then kind of reshape your belief based on that, because tradition can be a good thing, but it can also be somewhere that you're stuck in the past. And people are always looking to the future and looking to the past, but we never really realize where we are right now. And I think that kind of just makes you have to realize where you are right now before you can truly see either way.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're onto something there, especially for the more careful kind of person, the more mindful person. What's so tough about that sometimes is, to what extent traditions inform who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So, please.
With my background base, I came from Russia, which is very traditional with the European sense of being very Russian. And so due to being adopted from an American family, I came to the States and trying to adapt with the culture, with the language. I believe it can improve in such a sense, but maybe with the United States, us being very well-rounded with our religions, cultural backgrounds, that we can progress as a whole nation, as a whole unit, to sustain better quality life.
Yeah, see, that's really fascinating. That's a fascinating perspective because I totally see where you're coming from. And, it kind of came across in a different way in the meeting. So here, I'll throw it out there. If you look at America as something like, traditionally it was called a melting pot. Mm-hmm. I think it's a better way to say it is we're pluralistic. There's a plurality of different traditions. And you could even say that America itself is the place where multiple traditions, sometimes even not competing, but maybe antithetical traditions can coexist in harmony, in theory. But then it's kind of like, well, how is it cohesive? if America is just sort of home to all these different traditions, is there such a thing as something like an American tradition? It seems as though it's tough to develop a tradition if you typically are inviting traditions to sort of live alongside one another,
Right.
because it's like, well, which one is where's our identity? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And I think especially in religion, there's a lot of tradition kind of wrapped up in that. Like me being Jewish and like you being Roman Catholic, I'm sure there's a lot of tradition between the two. And it's kind of hard to say, oh, this is how our community is moving forward, but my tradition says that this is the right way to be.
Exactly.
So it's kind of hard to balance the two.
Yeah, and especially if, the traditions that, promote certain values within you, prior to your sort of coming of age and being able to decide for yourself, they can be a part of, a core feature of who you are individually.
Right.
And some of those traditions and values themselves become challenged. It's hard not to take it personally. And so when you feel encouraged to rethink traditions, sometimes it can be scary because it means rethinking your very
Your
self.
whole self. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But then it kind of makes you stronger in what you believe afterwards, though. So yeah, it may be uncomfortable for a bit, but once you finally realize like where you're supposed to be, then you're really confident in that. And I think that's kind of how life goes, though. Like the more you go forward, the more it fragments and then comes back together more whole than it was before. Like even just every
beautiful.
semester that I've been here at school, every time I come out of the semester feeling more confident in who I am and more confident in knowing what I know, because I know why I know what I know and believe what I believe more than I did before. I don't know. I think it's just really beautiful how that's how life works.
That's nice. And so in your rendition here, it's sort of it ends in cohesiveness.
Yeah, it does. Like even this
interesting.
class, even this, it's crazy because it constantly just
great.
fragments and then comes back together and you're like, oh, I see now. I see. This is justice. This is this, And even like with the Bo Bergdahl thing.
I wonder if everybody's having that experience.
I would hope so.
So,
But like even with the Bo Bergdahl thing, like the way that the lady on the podcast laid it out, it
Sarah
was
Koenig,
crazy.
yeah.
Yes, it was crazy because like at first you kind of hate Bo, and you're like, you bad person. I can't say bad words on the air.
thank you for censoring yourself.
You're welcome. But you walked off. You deserted. But then she kind of, as the show progresses, I think like episode 7 or 8, it starts being like, oh my God, look at all these other things. And then you're like, wow, poor Bo Bergdahl. You're like, oh my God. So I honestly think that's kind of what my essay is going to be. It's going to almost take a different standpoint on looking at him through the eyes of how it kind of came together in a different way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool.
No, that sounds fascinating. And so, yeah, we're referencing, of course, Serial 2, Serial the Podcast Season 2.
Yes.
And that's Serial, Serial.
As in serial killer.
Yes, not Serial the Breakfast Cereal. And, of course, and this is the Honors Ethics class. Hannah's a student therein. And, she's, their final essay is on Serial Podcast Season 2, namely the Bo Bergdahl Sitch. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I wonder if that's how it is for everybody, because I can imagine people who, when it begins to fragment, they despair and they don't try to revise the narrative to recompose things and bring it back together again. I think it could be very scary for some people when they have competing convictions, contradictive convictions.
It definitely can. And like even with things in my life that have happened, like things fragment and they come back together. And I think it's almost because I'm used to thinking about things that way now. So that it just kind of, it's a more natural thing, because like my mom says that you can't grow unless you have things that kind of tear you apart on the inside first, and then you kind of grow more from that. So it's kind of the same thing.
It's very Nietzschean.
Yeah.
Yeah. That what does not kill you makes you stronger.
Yes.
And I think, there is something to that. But I just, not in all cases, I wonder, because I've seen people who break from it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it becomes a matter of strength. And, a true desire to make your life self-determined, your own. And I think, when especially nowadays, when people come of age, right around the age, I think, of a typical college student, such as yourselves, you begin to recognize that tradition isn't set in stone necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Even if maybe, upon realizing that, you wish it were.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to make a decision.
Sure.
But, and so we're kind of focusing here on sort of personal tradition, from the individual standpoint, which is great, which is fine. But, let's consider bigger shifts for a second here. For example, there was a time where it was understood that we were the center of the universe in the West, and
the world was flat.
yes, things along these lines, where God created this world in a way for us, and I'm jumping onto the Judeo-Christian value system here and the sort of origin story, and that's because God loves us and made us in His image and likeness, and then Copernicus discovered that the Earth revolves around the sun. The Copernican revolution, no pun intended, a revolution. And it compelled people to question traditional values that were precedented on beliefs of where we came from. Or, which is another way of saying, it was hard to reconcile the idea that we are sort of the crown of God's creation, relatively speaking, with the understanding that we're just on a planet, much like other planets that just revolve around one sun in one galaxy among countless it was very difficult to try to make the two consistent, and a lot of people felt a lot of cognitive dissonance. People were like, well, this is evidentiary proof, but I don't want to necessarily act on it because that would compel this sort of scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens when you have this sort of revelation, you have this sort of, we'll just say, profound evidence to rethink the narrative, to challenge the traditional narrative. It could be, it could be for better or for worse, I suppose.
It's true. And I think people get really threatened when things happen that challenge the narrative, unintended.
Definitely, they do.
But when, I want to say Galileo, I could be completely wrong. Did he say that the world was round?
Yeah, so you had the big ones here were when I think you have Copernicus, you have Galileo, and you have, I would say, Kepler. Those three major scientists, and even Descartes to an extent. Those three in the 1600s, and around that time, the Enlightenment era, modern era. Yeah.
But I think they killed him when he said that.
Yeah, it was dangerous. They were considered blasphemous.
Yeah, they were like, "How dare you challenge what we believe in? How dare you challenge our traditions?"
Yeah. I mean, Descartes wrote a book called Descartes. He's the guy who invented Cartesian coordinates, like x-axis. He was a geometrician.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote his discoverings in a way that was attempting to pay homage to the church, while kind of challenging the narrative in ways, and he was trying to be delicate with it, and eventually his books got burned. He was considered a blasphemer. Even though he says in the book, you can only know two things, that you exist and that God exists. And they still thought, based upon his logic, that maybe he didn't really mean that. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, please.
I would also say, taking it back to the Judeo-Christian kind of things, Jesus, he challenged the narrative in a lot of ways, and they killed him too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when our belief is challenged in that way, we kind of want to make it disappear. We want to make that uncomfortableness, that feeling that everything is falling apart because we actually don't know anything at all, and we realize that ignorance, then we're like, oh my God, we have to fix it. So we just, take it away. But then it turns out that it was right or whatever.
Or you disregard, you deny it.
Exactly, yeah.
And again, taking it back to the individual level, I mean, maybe you've discovered something that forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew about who you were.
Right.
And sometimes people just choose to ignore it. And they rather not think it, or they don't believe it, because to believe it would compel you to act on it. And that might be life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough. And so in these ways, at least individually, tradition, at least a tradition you inherit, could potentially keep you from developing, keep you from progressing. If we want to consider progression to be something akin to coming into your own, having your own, making your beliefs yours, taking ownership of them, not simply inheriting them and then just kind of having them, you know what I mean? But possessing them, self-possess. So, yeah. But what if you make tradition itself, what if the tradition itself becomes one of a critical or questioning tradition? Like, could that somehow overcome it, where it becomes the rule of thumb is to question the status quo philosophically, challenging the narrative as the tradition?
Right. I think that would be a good tradition, though. I think it would cause us to just think about why we believe what we believe and think about, I don't know, just be more confident in who we are.
Okay.
We have discoveries. You know, people from back to the times to now innovate, and with technology, with art, with culture.
Totally.
And we say traditional views can't be progressed, but because we don't want that, because, you know, when Steve Jobs made the Mac, people were like, this is impossible. What are you talking about? This is never going to happen. But it happened. Yeah. And we have now are living in a very technology based world where that's all we think about. So if then somebody else innovates something else, it's going to be like, what are you talking about?
It's be the same thing. Yeah.
Nothing's going to change.
It sounds like you're talking about a tradition of innovation.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we use the word progress. Innovation probably would have been a better term. Tradition, and can tradition hamper innovation? Right. Or does innovation owe its innovations to tradition?
Right.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to that, because when quote unquote progress is being made, it's going to appear foreign because it's not going to be what we're familiar with. Potentially. Yeah. What I mean, so here's the thing. All the stuff that you listed before, like arts and technology, sometimes those things are what preserve tradition too.
Yes.
So you think of like art history, for example, and you know, there are certain ancient Greek statues or paintings that you look at them now, and maybe you relate to them on your terms, but you also understand, you can appreciate that, oh, you know, this is representative, emblematic of the values and the culture of the time, either in terms of how it's embodying them or in terms of how it's sort of, again, rejecting them by being iconoclastic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Me, I haven't gone back to...
Don't look away when I make eye contact with you.
I studied a little bit in Europe, and I was able to go to Venice. I was able to go to Rome and see...
You trying to make me feel bad about myself?
It was...
Humble brag.
It was amazing, but it also gave me...
cut Mike too.
It also gave me fulfillment of my own traditional views and how where I came from, you know, it stands put, but people use the stance on tradition to innovate more traditions, more stances. So another 40 years later, our history now would be the history of people alone.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
To the point where, again, it's almost an inevitability that what is contemporary becomes traditional. It becomes the present becomes the past. The future becomes the present, which becomes the past. Yeah, so there is that sort of, I guess, trajectory. But I wonder if things aren't cyclical, or rather if things are more successive, in the sense of like a gradual development. Because I think that was the issue. By the way, let's end the requack. There were a lot of issues brought up with this term, like progress, and I think the idea is that progression suggests that you're getting better, that you're refining, you're enhancing, you're improving, and it's maybe, or is it always the case that innovation could be positive? Sometimes, in an attempt to question tradition or advance tradition, couldn't you end up doing things that really hamper progress?
Right. We have lived in the past, in our history, that when a couple of our world leaders had...
You look like you're sleeping. Don't say that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was looking down and not sleeping.
Contemplative, yeah.
Yes.
The past leaders, some of them who did try to innovate and make progress, it became a downfall, you know. So I do understand that repeating history can also be non-progressive.
Yeah, and then of course it also depends on who you ask. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Progress might be considered regression, depending.
Or it could be regression under the guise of progression.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So, what do you guys? So you guys had an episode yesterday to change the topic slightly, changing the narrative, challenging the narrative. That was on what was it again? You told me after class yesterday.
I did. Free America.
That's right, Free America.
Yeah,
okay, interesting.
About how not like free as in like freedom, yay, but as in
like Louisiana Purchase, like a Free America.
As in like should like man, it was so long ago yesterday. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I know what I feel the same way. I feel the same way. Time doesn't make sense right now.
It doesn't. And I have like 15 things due in 2 weeks. I'm like, yay.
I got to finally look at essay ones. I'm sorry. I mean, I got to post those grades.
Mm-hmm.
Too real.
Yeah, right. Let's see. We read an article that was talking about should the government boost people's incomes that are under a certain amount? And they said $100,000 was like the line, the poverty line or whatever. I was like, damn, that's a lot for a poverty line. It was an interesting conversation, actually. It didn't go quite the way I thought it was going to. It kind of gone to talking about parenting styles. And
what?
Yeah,
cool.
I know. Yeah. And kind of about should single parents be given like a government paycheck for staying home.
Wow.
That is interesting.
It
That's
is.
a great
It very
topic.
is interesting. And so Trace was saying things like stay-at-home parents kind of help their children grow up in a better way than parents who go out and work. So that would be really good for them to have a paycheck when they stay home, because that would allow them to kind of connect with their children on a deeper level. And Cameron was kind of saying the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. So it was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think right there you have fertile ground for innovation versus tradition.
It's true, yeah. That tradition that women are supposed to be in the more of a traditional house idea.
and not get compensated for it.
Yeah, exactly. Where the man is supposed to go and provide for the family. And, when I get married and have kids, I probably will stay home and take care of them. But still, I like to think that I can. Exactly. But Cameron was saying that, for single parents, it's hard for them to stay home and take care of their kids. And even if it was an option for like her mom would probably want to go out and still work, because it kind of gives that connection to the outside world.
Oh, that's a brilliant point.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. They both made really good points. So it was interesting.
Yeah. With whom did you agree, or did you take a side?
I didn't get much of a word in edgewise, to be honest.
I can't wait to hear that episode.
Oh yeah, it'd be fun. He
Sneak
still
preview.
hasn't posted 3 of ours, I think.
Oh, you got to get on him.
I know. I don't want to make him feel bad. Jack. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, we'll gang up on him afterwards.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Well, anyway, I bring that up because it does seem like, I mean, basically, y'all's podcast is precisely this. You explore, again, questions of the status quo, critiquing the status quo, maybe in the name of improvement or refinement or not. When you're at your best, when you're at your worst, it's a lot of bickering. But
True.
that's actually also very entertaining.
It is, though. It really is. And then we come off the show and we're like, that was just a really bad episode.
That's what I think every time I record this.
Oh, I thought you were saying about ours. I was like, wait. Take that back, Mizzy.
So we're in agreement.
I'm going to sit Cameron on you.
No, that's cool. Yeah, it'd be nice to one day maybe get an invitation to join your podcast for a change. Nice of you to
You're
extend the
more than
invitation.
welcome. You obviously said you were going to that one time we were talking about feminism, and then you didn't cancel your class and you didn't come, and I was all ganged up on and stuff.
Yeah, well,
Fun times, man. Fun
I was
times.
teaching you a lesson on feminism.
I see. So
Anti.
basically, I can take care of myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't need you.
Yeah.
What?
I made your point for you
Thank you.
by making you make it.
Wi-Fi's.
Yeah, Wi-Fi. So yeah, okay, what do we got? About 20, 15 minutes left. This is great 'cause there's one other dimension of this I want to hit upon here.
So, folks, that's it. I'm just kidding.
Well, that's the idea of, I guess, the value of tradition, to put it this way. It seems like in different points in time, tradition was valued differently. And I mean tradition, like with a capital T, like the grand narratives, the sort of traditions that are all-encompassing. So, I mean, what's an example of a tradition that seems to be all-encompassing? Well, again, I think we could look back at Judeo-Christian value system where, again, based upon the metaphysical understanding of our origin, we are a certain kind of thing. And as that kind of thing or creature, it behooves us to live certain ways by cultivating or fostering certain virtuous behavior and avoiding vicious or sinful ones. And as a result, we develop rituals, customs, this is where culture comes from, that allow us to sort of encapsulate in everyday life in real time, as well as during special sacred sacramental times, rituals or I guess codes of conduct, ways of expressing, giving expression, giving rise to sort of deeper metaphysical truths that dictate our moral philosophy.
Right.
Not everybody values that whole kind of thing. Some people may argue that, any sort of way in which you're completely beholden to a tradition or anything that determines you, namely a tradition that determines you, is one that should be abandoned because it's not giving you the freedom that maybe you otherwise would have. The tradition is kind of, I think of somebody like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who posited the idea that, man is born free, but everywhere he's in chains. That's another way of saying that, man in its natural states is not, for example, born into sin or something. He's born free and happy and content. And then when he enters society,
he learns
to be, he enslaves himself to the society's expectations and society's values and tradition's values. But prior to having any exposure to tradition, you can consider natural man would be completely spontaneous. Completely, how to put this, self-determining, which is to say he knows not of any sort of tradition. And so without the influence, the guiding or dominating influence of a tradition, of values that he must accept, at least initially, he's able to be completely free.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
So tradition as something like a bedrock or a springboard, but also something like an anchor.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Which an anchor can be good or bad, depending if you want to go somewhere or if you
Anchor's away.
Yeah, exactly.
I come from Rhode Island. Our emblem is the anchor. Because we're the ocean state.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because it sounds like you have exposure to different kinds of traditions based upon your past experiences.
Yes.
Do you find yourself, and you don't have to get specific, I suppose, but this goes to you as well, Hannah. Do you find yourselves, how to put this, ranking traditions? Like, are there some traditional, well, we could put it this way, are there some traditional values in your own, or maybe you've been exposed to, that you think are, I guess, superior to others?
My opinion, no.
Okay.
I don't believe any tradition should be superior to others.
Okay.
It's a value. It's the way you live, the culture. I believe that I moved to the States, we didn't really keep the tradition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I kept it inside me.
Yeah.
But my parents, they never really lived the tradition like that.
That's so fascinating. Yeah.
But I don't believe it should be superior. It should be an overall rounded value that we live through.
Yeah, equally respectful, you know what I mean? Just difference.
Yeah.
And I only bring that up because that kind of throws a wrench into the whole progress thing.
Yeah. If you think that you're somehow better or your traditions are somehow better than others.
Yeah. I mean, so, you consider, some contemporaries who look back at like the ancient Greek polytheistic religion, and they look back and they're like, that's not nearly as refined or rational, or we see it was good for the time, but it's not attainable. You know what I mean? And that's that progressive. We're developing, we're improving. I think that's part of it. And so if you want to acknowledge that all traditions are created equal, then it's tough to say we're making progress or developing. You'd have to say no, we're just being different. But it's so fascinating, especially hearing about stories. But people coming to America, I'm third generation Italian. So, my great-grandmother was alive for most of my childhood, and she was born in Italy and moved here. They made the effort to assimilate.
Mm-hmm.
So they made the free, independent decision to, at least to some extent, try to abandon their heritage in favor of a tradition that they deemed to be, if not more superior, maybe worth exploring, wanting to
maybe
become a part of it.
Adopt the
Yeah.
values and
Yeah.
the traditions of. Okay, that's interesting.
My father's family is European, Hungarian.
Oh, interesting.
So, they lived in the States and then they went to Europe. One lives in France, one lives in Italy, one lives in London. They all adapted to the
And you're in
cultural
Dallas.
tradition. And I'm Dallas. I did the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean I should say this. It's hard not to notice traditions, both when you recognize others as inhabiting yours and others who don't, and they have their own.
Yeah.
What I find to be so rewarding is, of course, everybody's born into a tradition, and everybody's raised in a tradition. It's when you get to the point where you can decide for yourself to what extent you want to remain faithful to the tradition, and to what extent you want to, maybe even on premises somehow encouraged by that very same tradition, you want to deviate therefrom, or again, try to maybe emphasize an aspect of it and make that a focal point in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So also within families, there are cultures and traditions that kind of develop and kind of create new traditions as well. So like if, my mom is Jewish and my dad's like not necessarily, but they kind of came together in that culture and created some different things.
Yeah,
it's cool.
exactly.
Yeah. My dad likes turkey for Thanksgiving and mom could care less, but dad wins. I think it should be said.
Well, but here's the thing, to some people, the more dogmatic, the more, fundamental traditionalists, they might look at that as something that is a complete departure from the tradition.
Right.
And they would judge you by that.
Instead of coexisting between the two.
Yeah, you have strife.
Mm-hmm.
Most traditions that are dogmatic, run that risk, I feel. And especially, if you want to belong to a tradition dogmatically in a place like America, which is, founded on the idea of, religious liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not founded, but it's part of it, religious
Right,
liberty.
right.
No, I think you could say founded. That's at any rate. Going back to Plymouth Rock, it was just Thanksgiving, but yeah, I think. Look, like I said, I'm third generation Italian. My name is Jeffrey with a G. There's nothing Italian about that, and that was by design. My grandpa's name is Nunzio. My great grandpa's name was Nunzio. My Giovanni, Mario, and then when we come to America, my mom's name is Beverly. It's stuff like that. I mean, that's innovation within tradition, you might say.
Right.
With my parents, my Russian name was Tatiana,
Okay.
and
Okay.
now it's Eva. But they wanted me to be American and felt like home, like family to my parents. So they, I guess, took that small tradition I had with Tatiana away, but I still kept my moral beliefs of some of the religion, some of the cultural,
The customs. Yeah.
the food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's and so I did too. And part of it has to do with tradition's influence on me. I mean, I was raised, and it's nonetheless in an Italian household, so there are features of me that are going to be traditional, and I'll always have them because again of tradition's influence. Look, my favorite flavor in the world is marinara sauce. That's just how it is. It's the truth. I love it more than anything, especially when there's mozzarella involved. It's the best. That's those are literally my sensibilities, my tastes. And
I like pizza too.
yeah, pizza as well. But the Roman Catholic thing again, I'm not a practicing Roman Catholic and haven't been for a very long time. But that's certainly a part of my tradition. I was raised going to church, for a little bit. I did the sacraments. I had communion. I had good confession, all that good stuff. But yeah, when it came time for me to choose, I chose to abandon those cultural traditional rituals, for reasons that I can say are my own. But interestingly enough, you could argue that people deviate for reasons that seem to be the same universally. So even there are traditional elements to deviation or innovation itself, which is
That's true,
fascinating.
yeah.
Cool. Well, let me ask you guys. Anything else you want to? Any final comments? Because we're gonna, it takes a little bit to wrap up, and then
Yeah.
I got to dash. Excuse me. Anyways, excuse you, Hannah. What? Well, I mean, what do y'all think? What are your final thoughts here? Are you? Do you guys consider yourselves traditional, and whatever that means to you? If somebody would come to you and say, "Do you consider yourself traditional?" Would you say yes or no? Or would it depend on who's asking?
I would say yes.
You'd say yes. Okay.
I would say yes. I am very traditional in a lot of senses, but I guess there are some progressive parts of me, but I kind of maintain to the way I kind of was raised and the religion with which I was raised. My brother, not so much.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
within the family.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting also to kind of see as a big sister, as kind of they grow, and you kind of get to see. It's not always a good thing, but you kind of get to see how they change and grow and decide to be who they are.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see.
You can broaden your perspective that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like my brother, he says he's not Jewish, and
wow.
he
renounces it.
Yeah, he does.
It's his prerogative.
It is.
It's his pierogi. That makes no sense. Okay,
No,
whatever.
it doesn't. You tried.
I'm hungry, and I got to go lead a workshop.
Oh, dang. Nobody brought you snacks today?
No, you're the
Dang.
best. Yeah, I think everybody's
know.
stressed out right now, and they're just not thinking of old Prof M.
The most important.
Exactly. And what about yourself? It sounds like, based upon your responses, that you would kind of say like yes and no, I suppose.
I guess the world would be adaptable. I'm very adaptable.
Okay.
I have my beliefs, but I can also adapt to all kinds of cultures.
That's very very healthy.
Yeah,
it
I
is.
think so. It's open-minded.
Yeah.
That's the thing is, hopefully you come from a tradition that values outside perspectives.
Mhm.
But again, not all of them do.
Right.
All right. Well, cool. That'll do it. It was great having you guys on, especially last minute. I hope you come back.
Yes, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
It was really nice to meet you, too. I'm glad you came.
Thank you.
Oh,
We
I thought
actually
you-
just, shared a table.
Oh, I thought you guys were like friends all semester or something. Oh.
Well, now.
Well, Hannah, great having you on. You're one of my all-time favorite students. So it was really great to get you on the
I know.
podcast. Well, okay, now I just changed my mind. All right,
Challenge the narrative.
you are listening to, that's so ball. I pay her. I give her the highest praise. She's like, yeah, I know. Jesus, that is baller. I got to get on that level. You are listening to KDOX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We are the voice of Richland College. And again, this has been the Philosophy Club Radio Hour. And the Philosophy Club Radio Hour is an extension of the Philosophy Club proper. The Philosophy Club proper meets every Tuesday this semester, and only 2 Tuesdays left because we are meeting during finals week. That is what we voted on. So we got next week and then the week after. Excuse me. And next week, I should say this, the Philosophy Club, the meeting is going to take place in an atypical venue. Professor Kaylin Scoggins of the Government Department, who is a frequent guest on the show and, frequent Philosophy Club guest or member, I should say. He's delivering a public lecture as part of the Philosophy Department's Contemporary Issues in Philosophy and Religion lecture series. He'll be lecturing on war, whether or not war is justified, and especially with regard to foreign and international, we'll just say engagement and interaction, which is part of his bread and butter. It comes from a dissertation he's putting the finishing touches on, and it syncs up nicely with the topic. The club topic is dictatorship, so it should be a good one. Yeah, it should be fun.
Like me.
I believe that's going to be in the Lago Vista Gallery. That's second floor of the library. How do you say Lavaca?
Yeah, I think
I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't either.
Also
I just make it
Lavesa.
up as I go.
Lavesa. It might be Lavesa. Who knows? I always win the
Sounds
funny.
Italian, not like that.
I love that, Che.
Love it.
That was pretty good.
Bellissimo.
Yes. Manzi. You know what manzi means in Italian?
No.
So the Italian word for bull or also beef is manzo.
Mhm.
And an I, pronounced E, is what you do when you describe something, but it's actually a smaller version of it. So manzi means like little bull,
Aw.
or like little beef or something like that. Anywho, yeah. So there's that about the Philosophy Club. Views expressed on the show are our
Manzi's
own,
own.
our Manzi's own, unless otherwise stated, and hardly ever reflect the opinion of KDOX Web Radio, Richland College, or the Dallas County Community College District. Ladies and gentlemen, please tune in to Changing the Narrative.
Challenging.
Challenging the Narrative every Tuesday from what is it, noon to 1?
No, 1 to 2
1 to 2
on Tuesdays.
Oh, okay. I may have been reading this chart wrong for 2 years.
You were.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, that's why I haven't been showing. I've been showing up an hour early, and I just think you guys are blowing me off. So please tune in for that,
Sure.
and yeah, continue to support. And last but certainly not least, make sure we think about it. Peace, y'all.